The human soldier didn't know the little alien girl he saved was actually his daughter. Sergeant Jonas Harper tightened his grip on the rifle, his eyes scanning the horizon. The sky was a dull orange, a heavy smoke billowing into the air from the wreckage of the once thriving human colony. It had been a peaceful place until the alien forces arrived. Now it was nothing more than a battlefield, a forgotten piece of Earth's expansion effort in a far-flung corner of the galaxy. Jonah's mission was clear: rescue any survivors and evacuate them to safety. His Special Forces team had been deployed for this very reason, to pick up the pieces of a destroyed settlement and make sure no one was left behind. He'd seen many things in his years as a soldier, but nothing like this. "Stay sharp," Jonas ordered, his voice steady, but there was a hint of weariness in it. His team, all battle-hardened soldiers, nodded and moved with precision. They were used to the chaos of war, but this mission had a different feel. They had been briefed on the attack, an unexpected assault by a new alien race, one that wasn't on anyone's radar. No one knew much about them, except that they were ruthless and fast. As they advanced into the heart of the colony, Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The streets were eerily quiet, too quiet. The occasional echo of distant gunfire was all that could be heard, but it seemed like the whole place was abandoned. "Cover the alleyways," Jonas ordered, motioning for two of his men to move to the sides. "We don't know how many are left." The team spread out, checking every corner, every building. The colony had been left in a state of chaos, with debris and shattered walls everywhere. The signs of a quick and brutal attack were evident. There were signs of firefights, bloodstains on the ground, and overturned vehicles that had been used as barricades. It was clear that the colonists had fought hard to survive, but they hadn't been prepared for what came next. As Jonas moved forward, he spotted something strange. A small figure huddled against the side of a collapsed building. At first, he thought it might be a child, but it didn't look like any child he'd ever seen. The girl was alien, with big, expressive eyes and skin that shimmered faintly in the dim light, a pale blue-green hue that seemed almost otherworldly. Her clothes were torn, and she was trembling, her face stained with dirt and fear. Jonas's heart skipped a beat. She was the only one left, the last survivor. He couldn't leave her behind. He had seen enough destruction, enough loss. He couldn't bear to see another innocent life lost, especially a child. Without thinking, he rushed to her side, kneeling down to her level. "Hey, it's okay," he said gently, offering her his hand. His voice softened as he spoke to her, trying to calm her in the midst of the madness. She looked up at him, her wide eyes filled with terror, but there was something else there too, something familiar, something that tugged at Jonas's heart. The girl didn't speak. She didn't move, but she didn't pull away either. It was as if she was waiting for something, someone to save her. Jonas's mind raced. There was no time to waste. His team needed to fall back to the extraction point. He couldn't afford to be delayed any longer, but he couldn't leave her here alone. He looked around quickly. The sounds of distant gunfire were growing louder, and he knew that the alien forces were closing in. "Stay with me," he said, lifting her into his arms. She felt small, fragile, but she clung to him, her tiny fingers gripping his uniform as if she had no intention of letting go. Jonas hesitated for a moment, wondering what had happened to her family, to the others who might have been here. But there was no time to think about it now. The girl needed him. He turned and started running toward the extraction point, keeping low and moving as fast as he could. The rest of his team was already making their way back, and they didn't hesitate when they saw Jonas with the girl. They had all seen the devastation. They knew better than to question his decision. But as they ran through the broken streets of the colony, Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He kept glancing down at the girl in his arms, and there was a strange sense of familiarity, something he couldn't place. It wasn't just her eyes or the way she looked at him. It was something deeper. They reached the extraction point, a small clearing outside the colony's perimeter, where the transport ship was waiting. The team quickly moved into position, covering the area while Jonas placed the girl inside the ship. He didn't want to think too much about what had just happened, about the horror of the battle or the questions surrounding the girl's origins. For now, she was safe. That was all that mattered. But as the ship lifted off and they made their way into orbit, Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that the girl had something to do with him. It was as if he had known her his whole life, but that didn't make sense. He had a family back home, a wife and daughter he hadn't seen in months. They were thousands of light years away, and this girl wasn't human. Still, the feeling gnawed at him. He couldn't explain it, but he couldn't ignore it either. The ship's captain, a tall, no-nonsense officer named Captain Lyra, turned to Jonas as they flew toward the safety of a nearby space station. "What's the deal with the girl?" she asked. Jonas looked down at her, the small alien girl now quietly resting against him. "I don't know," he said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of the unknown. "But I'm not leaving her, not after what happened." Lyra raised an eyebrow but didn't press the issue. She understood the bond soldiers sometimes felt for those they saved, especially in the chaos of war. But there was something more to this situation, something Jonas couldn't put into words. As the ship entered the darkness of space, Jonas gazed out the viewport, his thoughts drifting. He thought about his wife, Amanda, and their daughter, Mia. He hadn't spoken to them in weeks, and the silence was beginning to wear on him. The last message he had received was brief, a simple "stay safe, we love you." But the message had been sent weeks ago. He wondered if they were okay. He wondered if they knew about the war, about the destruction that had been brought to the colonies. And then there was the girl. She wasn't human. She wasn't even from Earth, but there was a connection between them. Jonas didn't understand it, but he knew one thing for sure: he was going to protect her. No matter what it took, Jonas sat in the small, sterile room on the space station, the hum of the ventilation system the only sound. The girl, who still hadn't spoken a word, sat quietly beside him on the bench. She was small, too small for her age, with pale green skin and large, expressive eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. Despite her strange appearance, she seemed calm, almost as if she knew exactly where she was and why she was there. Jonas had watched her closely since they had left the battlefield. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeply familiar about her, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't put his finger on it. He had seen many strange things during his years as a soldier, but this was different. This girl wasn't just another survivor of a war-torn colony. She was something more. Her gaze often met his, and each time there was a brief moment where it felt like something inside him shifted. But how could that be? He had a family back home, his wife, Amanda, and their daughter, Mia. He hadn't seen them in months, but he thought of them every day. They were thousands of light years away. This girl couldn't possibly have anything to do with him. Still, the pull was there. Jonas sighed and rubbed his face with both hands. He was tired, exhausted, really. The battle had taken its toll on him, both physically and mentally. He had lost count of how many lives had been lost in the war, how many planets had been reduced to rubble, but the faces of the people he couldn't save always stayed with him. And now, this girl. She wasn't just another casualty to him. She was someone he had to protect. A soft sound interrupted his thoughts. He looked down at the girl, who had stood up and was now reaching for his hand. Her fingers were small and delicate, but they gripped him tightly, as if she was afraid to let go. Jonas hesitated for a moment, then gently placed his hand in hers. She didn't speak, but her eyes seemed to ask something he couldn't understand. "You're safe now," Jonas said softly, trying to reassure her, but he wasn't so sure himself. The girl had barely eaten since they had boarded the transport ship, and there was something about her that seemed fragile. She hadn't cried, she hadn't screamed in fear like most children would in such a terrifying situation. Instead, she was quiet, almost unnervingly so. He glanced around the room, which was bare except for a small table and 2 chairs. There was a window that looked out into the vastness of space, the stars twinkling far beyond their reach. Jonas couldn't help but feel a sense of isolation, as if they were stranded on a floating rock in the middle of nowhere. Captain Lyra had given them a brief debriefing upon arrival at the space station, but it hadn't been much. There were no answers, only more questions. Who was this girl? Why had she been on the colony? And most of all, why did Jonas feel this strange sense of connection to her? The silence between them stretched on. Jonas shifted uncomfortably, wishing he had something to say, something to break the tension. But he didn't. There were no words for this kind of situation, no training that could prepare him for this. The door to the room opened suddenly, and a woman in a white lab coat stepped inside. She had short black hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. Her name was Dr. Arya, and she was one of the lead scientists on the space station. She had been the one to examine the girl when they first arrived, but she had been careful not to give too much information. Jonas wasn't sure if it was because she didn't know or if she was just holding back. "Sergeant Harper," Dr. Arya said, her voice soft but direct. We've run some preliminary tests on the girl. We haven't been able to determine much yet, but there's something unusual about her. Jonas stood up immediately, his protective instincts kicking in. What do you mean unusual? Dr. Arya hesitated for a moment before answering. We've scanned her DNA, and while it's mostly alien, there are traces of something. Human, not just any human DNA, though. It's hard to explain. Jonas's heart skipped a beat. Human. Was that possible? He felt his chest tighten as he processed the words. The girl couldn't be human. She was clearly not from Earth. But why did the idea of her having human DNA send a chill down his spine? Is she dangerous? Jonas asked, his voice rough. Doctor. Arya shook her head. Not at all. In fact, she seems to be a blend of both species, human and alien, but we don't know how or why, and we don't know how advanced the alien part of her DNA is. Jonas's mind raced. A hybrid. He didn't know what to think. If this girl was a hybrid, it would explain some things. The strange connection he felt, the way she seemed to understand him even without speaking. But it didn't explain everything. He needed more answers. Do you think she can communicate? Jonas asked, his voice almost pleading for some kind of breakthrough. Dr. Arya glanced at the girl, who was now standing silently beside Jonas, her large eyes wide and curious. We're not sure. She's never spoken a word since we arrived, but that doesn't mean she can't. Her neural patterns suggest she may be capable of more than what we're seeing. Jonas couldn't help but feel a pang of hope. If the girl could talk, maybe she could help them understand what was going on. Maybe she could tell him more about who she was and why she felt so familiar to him. Dr. Arya stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the girl. We'll continue our studies, of course, but I think you should spend more time with her. Maybe you can get through to her. There's something about her, Sergeant, something that doesn't quite add up. I believe she's more important than we realize. Jonas nodded slowly, his thoughts heavy with the weight of her words. He wasn't sure what Dr. Arya meant, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to leave this girl alone, not when she needed him. As doctor. Arya left the room. Jonas sat back down on the bench, his hand still resting gently in the girl's. She looked up at him again, her large eyes locked onto his. And for a moment he swore that he saw something in those eyes, something that told him she knew more than she let on. A sudden thought struck him and his stomach churned. Could it be possible? Was it even remotely conceivable that this girl, this small alien child, was somehow connected to him? Could she be? His thoughts were interrupted when the girl finally moved. Slowly she took a deep breath and in a voice barely above a whisper, said something Jonas didn't expect. Daddy! Jonas froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The word was so soft, so fragile that he wasn't sure he had heard it correctly. But as he looked down at her, there was no mistaking it. The girl had spoken. She had called him Daddy. For a long moment, Jonas couldn't speak. He simply stared at the girl, the weight of her words settling heavily on his shoulders. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be. He had never seen this girl before, never even known she existed. Yet somehow in this strange, twisted world of war and loss, she had called him father. He swallowed hard, his mind racing. Could it be? Could this child, this little alien girl, somehow be connected to him? Could she be? Before he could ask the question aloud, the door to the room opened again. But this time there were no answers, only more questions. The days that followed were filled with silence. The girl who had called Jonas Daddy remained quiet, her eyes never leaving him. They sat in the same small room on the space station, surrounded by walls of sterile white, the hum of the ventilation system filling the air. Jonas couldn't shake the weight of her words, Daddy. It repeated over and over in his mind, and every time it felt heavier. Jonas had been a soldier long enough to understand that nothing in war was ever simple. But this was different. The connection he felt to the girl, even though she wasn't human, wasn't something he could explain. And the more he tried, the less sense it made. He spent the next few days with her, not because he was ordered to, but because he couldn't stay away. Every time he thought about leaving her in the care of the scientists, something pulled him back. She was too important, and he didn't trust anyone else to care for her. The researchers at the space station had continued their tests, trying to learn more about her. Her alien biology, her abilities, anything that could explain why she was so unlike any other being they had encountered. But no one seemed to be getting anywhere. The girl wouldn't speak beyond that one word. No matter how many times they asked, she remained silent, her gaze distant. Jonas didn't mind. He didn't expect her to talk. There was no need for words. He could see it in her eyes, the same expression that haunted him in his quiet moments. She was lost, just like him. They had both seen too much. One evening, after another round of tests, Jonas was sitting in the room with her, watching the stars pass by the station's viewport. The girl sat on the floor near the window, her legs crossed, her back straight. Jonas noticed that she always seemed to be looking out at the stars, as if searching for something. Sometimes she would point at them with a finger and Jonas would follow her gaze, but he never saw anything. "Do you miss home?" Jonas asked quietly, watching her intently. He didn't know why he asked. It seemed like a strange thing to say to an alien child, but somehow it felt right. The girl didn't respond, but her eyes met his as if she understood. Jonas wasn't sure how to take that. He didn't know if it was just his mind playing tricks on him, but there were times when she seemed so human. More human than anyone else he had encountered on this journey. He had seen enough battles, enough people broken by war, to know the signs of fear, of grief, of loss. And he saw it in her too. Even though she didn't speak, it was in the way she held herself, the way her small body tensed every time the station's alarms went off, or when the sound of boots echoed in the hallway. She was afraid. And maybe that was why Jonas felt so protective of her, because he understood. He had been there. As the hours passed, Jonas grew more restless. He needed answers. The girl had called him Daddy. It couldn't be a coincidence. But how? Why? He had been fighting for so long, he hadn't stopped to consider the strange circumstances that had led him here. He had no idea how this girl could be connected to him, but there was no way she was. His thoughts were interrupted when the door to the room opened, and Dr. Arya stepped in. She had been quiet lately, mostly focused on her work, but there was something different about her today. "Sergeant," she said, her voice as calm as ever, but there was a flicker of concern in her eyes. "We need to talk." Jonas stood up from his seat, his heart racing. He wasn't sure what this was about, but the tone of her voice made him uneasy. "What is it?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Dr. Arya took a deep breath before speaking. "We've discovered something unusual. We've been running some deeper scans, and it turns out the girl's DNA, well, it's not just human and alien. There's something else in her, something that shouldn't be possible." Jonas's pulse quickened. "What do you mean, something else, Doctor?" Arya hesitated, then motioned for Jonas to follow her. "Come with me," she said. "We need to show you something." Jonas glanced down at the girl, who was still staring out the window. She hadn't moved since he spoke to her. For a moment he thought of staying behind, of keeping her close. But he knew he had to follow Dr. Arya. He had to understand what was going on. As they walked through the sterile corridors of the space station, Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that they were moving deeper into unknown territory. The walls of the station were filled with the hum of machinery, the soft buzz of data being transferred through cables. It was almost like being in a dream, a quiet, haunting dream where nothing was what it seemed. They reached a small laboratory where a few researchers were gathered around a large computer screen. Dr. Arya led Jonas to the screen, where complex genetic data was displayed. She pointed to the screen, her finger tracing over the numbers and symbols. "Look at this," she said. "We've been comparing the girl's DNA to known samples, but the results are unexpected. We thought she was just a hybrid, half human, half alien. But it's more complicated than that." Jonas leaned forward, trying to understand what he was looking at. The data was incomprehensible to him, but the expression on Dr. Arya's face made it clear that this was no ordinary situation. "We ran a deep scan of her genetic structure," Dr. Arya continued, "and we found something strange. There's a sequence in her DNA that matches a classified file. It's linked to a human genetic project, one that's been hidden from the public." Jonas's mind raced. "What kind of project?" Dr. Arya looked at him carefully, almost as if she was weighing whether or not to tell him the truth. "The project was meant to create enhanced humans, super soldiers, if you will. There was a program years ago that used genetic manipulation to combine human DNA with alien traits. The goal was to make soldiers stronger, faster, and more adaptable." Jonas froze. The words felt like a punch to the gut. He had heard rumors of these types of experiments, but he had always dismissed them. He never imagined he would be caught up in something like this. "The girl's DNA, Doctor," Arya said, her voice steady but filled with a sense of dread, "matches that of someone who was part of this program, and the most shocking part is that the genetic signature we found in her, it's yours." Jonas's mind went blank. He staggered back, his heart racing. What do you mean it's mine? Dr. Arya's expression softened. Your DNA, Sergeant Harper, you were part of the project. Your genes were used in this experiment. Jonas couldn't speak. His legs felt weak, and he had to steady himself against the lab table. He had been part of some kind of genetic experiment. He didn't remember any of it, and then it hit him, the girl. The girl was his daughter. Somehow she was the product of this twisted experiment. The connection he had felt to her, the way she had called him daddy, it all made sense now, but it didn't make it any easier to understand. She's my daughter, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Dr. Arya nodded, her face grim. It seems that way. But we don't know everything yet. We don't know how this happened or why. We only know that the genetic signatures in her DNA match yours. Jonas's head spun. The girl wasn't just some random survivor. She was his flesh and blood. He had a daughter he didn't even know existed. He turned and left the lab without saying another word. He needed to think. He needed to understand how all of this was possible. But one thing was clear. His life had just changed forever. Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. The walls of the space station now felt confining, suffocating, as if they were closing in on him. The revelation that the girl, the small alien child he had vowed to protect, was his daughter had hit him harder than he had ever expected. He had always thought of himself as a soldier, someone who followed orders, someone who was used to the chaos of war. But this was something else entirely. This was personal. As he walked down the sterile corridors of the station, his thoughts raced. How could this be possible? How had he been a part of some secret genetic project without knowing it? He had been on countless missions, fought in battles across the galaxy, but he had never heard anything about this. The idea that he was part of some experiment, that his own DNA had been used to create this girl, it didn't sit right with him. How had it all happened? He needed answers, and he needed them fast. Jonas made his way to the medical lab, his mind focused on one thing, the girl. She was his daughter, his flesh and blood. But he had no idea how or why she was here, what had happened to her mother. And why had she been left alone on a destroyed colony? There were so many questions, too many to answer at once. When he arrived at the lab, Dr. Arya was already there, waiting for him. She had been quiet since their last conversation, but Jonas could see the concern in her eyes. She wasn't just a scientist anymore. She was someone who had seen the same things he had. They were both in this together now. But where would it lead? Sergeant Harper, Dr. Arya said, her voice calm but tense. I know this is a lot to process, but we need to keep moving forward. We need to understand what's happening before more questions come up. There's still so much we don't know. Jonas nodded, taking a deep breath. I don't know where to begin. Everything's changed. His words felt strange to him, like he was speaking someone else's thoughts. I know, Dr. Arya said, but we're running out of time. The alien factions we've been dealing with, they know about the girl. We're not the only ones interested in her. And we can't afford to have any more secrets come out. Jonas's eyes narrowed. You think they know she's my daughter? Dr. Arya hesitated, then spoke in a lower tone. They may not know exactly who she is to you, but they know she's important. We've intercepted communications suggesting that some factions have been looking for her for a long time. We don't know why yet, but we need to prepare ourselves. Jonas felt a chill run down his spine. The last thing he wanted was for someone else to take his daughter away. He didn't know what was happening, but he was not going to let anyone take her from him. I'm not letting anyone take her, Jonas said firmly. His voice was low, filled with a strength that surprised even him. She's my daughter. I'll protect her with my life, Doctor. Arya gave him a nod of understanding, but there was something else in her eyes. She wasn't just worried about the girl. She was worried about him. Jonas could see it in her face, the concern that had slowly been building since they first arrived. The situation was far more complicated than any of them had anticipated. There's more, Dr. Arya said, her voice steady but urgent. We ran some more tests on the girl's neural patterns. Her brain activity is unlike anything we've seen before. She's not just reacting to her environment. She's almost like she's processing things at an accelerated rate. It's as if she's learning faster than any child should be able to, Jonas frowned. What does that mean? It means, Doctor. Arya said, glancing at the computer screen, that the girl is evolving, faster than we expected. She's adapting to her surroundings at an incredible speed. And there's something else we found. We think she's capable of telepathy. Jonas's heart skipped a beat. Telepathy. He didn't know much about alien abilities, but he had heard rumors of psychic powers in other species. But the idea that the girl might be able to read minds or communicate without words was something entirely new. Telepathy, Jonas repeated, his voice filled with disbelief. Are you sure? Dr. Arya nodded, her eyes serious. We're still studying it, but the evidence is there. Her neural scans show unusual activity, patterns that suggest telepathic ability, and it's not just passive, it's active. She's able to reach out to connect with others on a mental level. Jonas took a step back, trying to process what he had just heard. This girl, my daughter, she's not just an ordinary child, she's something else. Dr. Arya's expression softened, but her eyes remained focused. She's more than we know, Sergeant, and we need to figure out what it means. We need to understand what she's capable of before someone else does. Jonas's mind raced. He had thought that protecting her would be enough, that keeping her safe from the war and the alien factions would be his only priority. But now he realized that the stakes were much higher. She wasn't just a survivor. She wasn't just a child in need of protection. She was something far more important, something that could change the future of the galaxy. I need to see her, Jonas said, his voice low but firm. I need to be with her. Dr. Arya nodded. I understand, but you need to be careful, Sergeant. The girl is still unpredictable. We don't know what her abilities might be, and if the alien factions find out what she can do, I'll protect her, Jonas said, his voice unwavering. I won't let anyone harm her. Dr. Arya didn't say anything else. She simply nodded and stepped aside, allowing Jonas to leave the lab. He made his way back to the room where the girl had been staying, his thoughts swirling with the new information. When he entered the room, he found her sitting by the window again, staring out into the stars. Her small figure seemed so fragile against the backdrop of the infinite darkness. But Jonas knew one thing: she was stronger than she seemed, and he was going to make sure that no one ever took her from him. The girl looked up at him as he entered, her big eyes meeting his. There was something about the way she looked at him, something that seemed to speak directly to his soul. He could feel it in his chest, the overwhelming sense of responsibility, of love, even though he didn't fully understand why. Jonas walked over to her and knelt down, meeting her at eye level. We're going to figure this out, he said softly. I promise you I'm not going to let anything happen to you. For a moment, the girl didn't respond. She simply stared at him as if weighing his words. And then, to his surprise, she reached out and touched his face with one small hand. The warmth of her touch was unlike anything he had ever felt before. It was as if, in that brief moment, everything else fell away. And then, for the first time since he had found her, the girl spoke again. Daddy, she whispered. Jonas's heart swelled with emotion. He didn't know how this was possible. He didn't know how any of this worked. But he knew one thing for sure. This little girl, this alien child, was his daughter. And he would do anything to protect her. The days following the girl's second words, Daddy, felt like a blur to Jonas. Every waking moment was consumed with the thought of her, and he could no longer ignore the weight of his new reality. His entire life had shifted in ways he couldn't even understand yet. The girl, his daughter, was something far beyond what he had ever expected. He had known battles, he had known war, but protecting this little girl, his daughter, was a different kind of fight. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and the secrets surrounding her only made things more complicated. She was no longer just the quiet, frightened child he had found on that destroyed colony. She was someone with power, someone important to forces beyond his control. He had been spending every moment he could with her, trying to protect her from everything, especially from the scientists and their tests. They had run hundreds of scans, trying to understand her alien biology and the strange abilities she had. They had discovered her telepathic abilities, but there was more, so much more. Her mind was far beyond any child's. It was as though she was processing the universe itself, understanding things she shouldn't have been able to understand. Jonas had no idea what that meant for her or for him, but there was one thing he did know for sure. He would do anything to keep her safe. No one, not even the highest commanders or the alien factions, would take her away from him. He couldn't let that happen. She was his responsibility now, and she had called him Daddy. Jonas sat by her side, watching the stars again. The small room they were staying in had a window that overlooked the vast emptiness of space. The stars were distant, cold, yet somehow comforting. But even as he looked out into the infinite, his thoughts were focused entirely on the girl beside him. She had grown quieter as the days went on, but Jonas still noticed her curious eyes watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. It was as if she was studying him, understanding him more than he understood himself. "Are you okay?" Jonas asked, breaking the silence. The girl didn't respond immediately. Instead, she tilted her head slightly as if processing his words. Then, after a long pause, she reached out and took his hand. Jonas looked down at their hands, his heart swelling in his chest. There was so much uncertainty about what was happening, but one thing was undeniable: she was his daughter, and he would never turn his back on her. He gently squeezed her hand. "I'm here, I won't leave you," he promised, his voice soft but steady. "We'll figure this out together." The girl didn't speak, but she didn't need to. Her grip tightened on his hand as though she understood exactly what he meant. He could see the trust in her eyes. It was more than just a child's trust. It was something deeper, something that transcended species, languages, and even time. Later that night, as they sat together in the small room, a message came through on the station's communication system. It was a high-priority signal, encrypted and untraceable. Jonas's heart dropped as he listened to the voice on the other end. "Sergeant Harper," the voice said, clipped and formal. "We have confirmed intel that alien factions are closing in on your location. They know about the girl. They are preparing to attack." Jonas felt the blood drain from his face. He had expected trouble, but not this quickly. The factions had found them. They were coming. "Where is the girl?" the voice asked, a hint of urgency in their tone. "She's with me," Jonas said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his insides. He couldn't let the fear show, not now. Not when his daughter was depending on him. "You need to move quickly. Get to the secured docking bay. We'll get you out of there." Jonas's hand tightened around the communicator, the words sinking in. The girl was in danger. His daughter was in danger, and he had to protect her. No one else could do it. He was the only one who could keep her safe. He looked down at the girl who had been silent through the whole exchange. She looked up at him, her big eyes filled with something that Jonas couldn't fully place. Fear, understanding, hope. It was all mixed together, but one thing was clear: she was ready. She trusted him to keep her safe. Jonas took a deep breath, trying to focus. He needed to make a plan, but there was no time. The alien factions were closing in, and the only option was to fight their way out. He couldn't run, he couldn't leave the girl behind. "Come on," Jonas said, standing up and extending a hand to the girl. "We have to move fast." She took his hand without hesitation, and together they walked out of the room. Jonas moved quickly, his heart pounding as he thought of the dangers they were about to face. The hallways of the station were empty, but he could hear the distant hum of alarms. The whole station was on high alert. Everyone knew what was coming. They made their way to the docking bay, where a transport ship was waiting for them. But as they approached, Jonas saw that the situation was far worse than he had anticipated. The docking bay was filled with military personnel, all in position, ready for the worst. The alien factions were out there, and they weren't going to let them leave easily. Jonas's eyes scanned the area, looking for a way out. But the transport ship was surrounded by enemy ships, their weapons aimed at the station. He could feel the tension in the air, the calm before the storm. His hands instinctively went to the weapons at his side. He wasn't going to let them take her, not without a fight. "Sergeant," Captain Lyra said, walking toward him. She had a grim expression on her face. "We've been able to secure the perimeter for now, but we don't have long. The enemy will be here soon." Jonas nodded, his eyes locked on the girl beside him. She was standing quietly, her gaze fixed on the ships outside the docking bay. He couldn't help but wonder what she was thinking. What was going through her mind? Was she scared? Did she know the danger they were in? "We have to make a move," Jonas said, his voice firm. "We can't let them take her." Captain Lyra gave him a nod. "We've got your back, Sergeant, but you need to be ready. This isn't going to be easy." Jonas looked down at the girl one last time. She was his responsibility. He would fight for her. He would protect her no matter the cost. The sound of approaching ships filled the air. Jonas could hear the engines of the alien craft getting louder, their weapons powering up. The time for talking was over. It was time to act. "Stay close to me," Jonas said to the girl, his voice low but reassuring. "We're going to make it out of here, I promise." With that, Jonas and the girl made their way toward the transport ship, the rest of the crew falling in behind them. The enemy ships were now only moments away. Jonas's heart raced, but he pushed the fear aside. His daughter was depending on him. The future of the galaxy might depend on her as well. They reached the transport ship, and just as they were about to board, the first wave of alien ships appeared on the station's sensors. The battle was about to begin. Jonas took a deep breath. This was it. This was the moment that would determine everything. The girl's future, his future, and the future of countless others. He wasn't going to lose her. Not now, not ever. The transport doors slammed shut behind them as the engines roared to life. Jonas stood at the front, his weapon ready, his eyes fixed on the enemy ships approaching. The girl was safe, for now. As the ship lifted off, the stars outside the window stretched into long lines, and Jonas felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. He had fought many battles, but this one, this fight to protect the girl who had called him Daddy, was the one that mattered most. They weren't out of danger yet, but Jonas knew one thing for sure. He would never stop fighting for her, no matter where this journey took them.